Welcome back, everybody. This is Fantasy Football 201, a advice show on my channel to help you in fantasy football. I picked 201 because 101 was taken by somebody else, but I'm going to go through fantasy football advice for the Tennessee Titans in this week. Only got two teams left to preview, Tennessee and then Washington we'll do later this week, and then we will complete all our team previews, go into strategy afterwards, and talk about how you can prepare to set yourself up for success in fantasy football for this upcoming season. So if you're interested in stuff like that, please check out my channel and consider commenting, or subscribing. I also do a lot of other stuff on my channel too, so check that out in the description below if you're interested, and consider checking out the channel. So before we get into specific on the Titans, I'm going to do a trivia question, and if you answer this trivia question, then I will shout you out in the video. I don't have a ton of subscribers right now, so if you take advantage of this and comment below, I will answer your fantasy football question and shout you out on the show for your support. So my trivia question for Tennessee in this video is, Derick Henry rushed for over 2,000 yards this year, but he's only the second Tennessee Titan to have done this before. Who was the other Tennessee Titan who rushed for over 2,000 yards? If you could guess this correctly in the comments section, first person to guess it will get their fantasy football question answered. So if you see there's 0 comments and you know who this individual is, just go ahead and comment that and then ask your question as well, and I will get that answered for you in the next video that I do. So we will go now to talking about the Titans season for 2021. Start out with their schedule, and I do this to look at ideal times to take advantage of these offensive players based on the defensive matchups they have. My takeaway with Tennessee is that they're more sell-high candidates at the beginning of the season than they are at the end, because they play a lot of relatively light defenses at the beginning, but then later on, especially in the playoffs, they get some difficult matchups. So start out the season, they play Arizona, which is projected to be an improved defense, but keep in mind they're introducing some new players into their scheme like J.J. Watt, things like that, and they're playing on the road in Tennessee. So all that being said, I don't really like Arizona's defense to dominate in that situation. Then they play Seattle on the road. Seattle's defense started out pretty poorly last year as well. And they've got some questions this year surrounding Jamal Adams. Then in week 3, they have the Colts, which I think will be a good defense, but the question is, will they even be able to stay off the field potentially if Carson Wentz is unable to play? And then they have 2 excellent matchups in week 4 and 5 against the New York Jets and the Jacksonville Jaguars. So my takeaway is that they have a very light schedule to start the season. These are all pretty good matchups for you to take advantage of with these Tennessee Titan players. But then things get more challenging later on. Week 9, they go to the Los Angeles Rams. They also play New England in there as well as Indianapolis on the road. I think that will be a more difficult matchup for them playing in the road environment. And then their fantasy football playoffs has arguably got their most difficult stretch. If you're playing in a system that uses the weeks 15, 16, and 17 and avoids that last week of the season, their matchups are Pittsburgh, San Francisco, and Miami. That's about as difficult as it gets for a fantasy football schedule. So keep that in mind with some of these Titans players, particularly somebody like Derick Henry. You're going up against front sevens like the ones that Pittsburgh and San Francisco especially can put out there. He might disappoint a little bit in the first few rounds of the playoffs. So just keep that in mind. I'm not saying don't draft Derrick Henry at all, but it's just something to consider for your roster. I will get into Derrick Henry in a sec, but first I'm going to start with their quarterback position and talk about Ryan Tannehill. So Ryan Tannehill, he's been a pretty productive quarterback over the last few years. I've generally liked him as a guy that you can get late in drafts or in streams and still put up some pretty good value for you. Last year, he was the number 8 overall fantasy football quarterback. So he gives you pretty good value as a late-end starter level guy that you can get on waivers. He's probably going to be available around that portion of the draft, and most likely may have an improvement in his numbers to some degree when you add Julio Jones. A few things to keep in mind, though, is that Ryan Tannehill ran for 7 touchdowns last season. I don't necessarily see that replicating this season because there's going to be some regression of that as expected potentially. But Ryan Tannehill is still, for the range that you're going to be able to get him in the draft, I think he's pretty good value for you. And he's got some mobility as well to run the ball. Not a bad quarterback to have that you can pick up pretty late in fantasy football drafts, especially if you're in a situation where in the first, about 3rd round is where A.J. Brown will go. But let's say you take A.J. Brown 2nd, 3rd, 4th round, something like that. Then I think I would definitely try to get Ryan Tannehill later on to get that QB stack, QB wide receiver stack. I think that could be a very lethal combination. So that's something to keep in mind as well, depending on the receivers you pick up and stuff like that. I'll get into more specifics on that in the upcoming weeks as we get closer to drafts about certain positions, who to draft where, things like that. But for now, just kind of looking at Tannehill's outlook for the season, I think he will be a decent quarterback for you to have. Overall, I'm a fan of him given the lack of significant hype that's going to drive his value up too high. Backup is Logan Woodside, I believe his name is. Yeah, Logan Woodside. Hopefully nothing happens to Tannehill because Logan Woodside doesn't really have a lot of experience, and I think that there could be a significant drop-off if something like that were to happen. But keep our fingers crossed. Hopefully they don't end up in a situation with like the Colts that they're having to deal with that right now. Now we will move to the running back position. And the running back that we have to start with Tennessee is Derrick Henry. Derrick Henry, monster season last year. He ran for 2,000 yards, as I said in the trivia question. The other one was Chris Johnson. Ding, ding, ding. That's your answer. So comment that below. If you stayed to this video, then I just gave you the answer. So comment Chris Johnson below and then ask your fantasy football question and I will answer it. See, this is what you get for sticking around in these videos. But Derrick Henry, 2,027 yards. 2,200 would be crazy, but 2,027 yards, 17 touchdowns. He had 378 attempts, which is by far more than anybody in the NFL. So in standard leagues, Derrick Henry is excellent. And I think that if there's a case to be made if you're in a standard league that Derrick Henry should be the #1 player taken. In PPR, I'm still going with a guy like Christian McCaffrey. He's pretty much the consensus pick because of what he can provide at the receiving level as well as the running level, as well as being able to run the ball. But Derrick Henry is definitely in the conversation for #1 overall pick, especially if you're in a half PPR or standard league. Derrick Henry, the only thing, I mean, he's about as consistent as you can get in terms of running backs and his ability to run the ball, get touchdowns. But there are some games where he does get game scripted out of it because Tennessee falls behind. They have to, basically, they're in a position where they have to throw to catch up. Example of this is, there was against Chicago earlier this year, they were behind, and Chicago's got a good front seven, so he was 21 for 68 in that game. Didn't have any receptions either. So that's an example of when he's at his I don't want to say at his worst, but when he's not performing well. But it really did not happen that often this season where he had these bust games. So I'm not overly concerned about that. But keep in mind, now that they have Julio Jones, it does lighten the load potentially for Derrick Henry. And there's always, to me, some concern for injury with him too, because of how he runs the ball and just the amount of volume he gets. So that is why I think you especially have to prioritize Darrynton Evans, who I'm going to talk about in a sec, just in case of any injuries. And speaking of which, we go now to Darrynton Evans, who is the backup running back for Derrick Henry. He's a guy that, if Henry is fully healthy, then Evans will pretty much be a non-factor. But talk about handcuffs. This is one of the best handcuff options to own as a guy that you could stash on your bench, especially if you're in a comfortable position with your running back depth. You can hold on to him, even give you some trade value to potentially trade him to the Derick Henry owner. And then if Henry for some reason gets hurt, hopefully it doesn't happen, but then that's excellent value for you. You've almost arguably have a top 10 running back just off of that. So he's a guy that I'm going to get into running back strategy specifically later, but this is why you fill up your bench with running backs and receivers instead of multiple tight ends, multiple defenses, etc. Because if you have good running back depth, then you can have room for these handcuffs. And then, like, smart fantasy owners will pick these guys up early. So if any injuries happen, you're not just in a mad scramble to the waiver wire. And if that happens anyway, then you're probably too late and you're not going to get him unless you're not playing well, unless your team is struggling. So keep an eye out for Darrynton Evans. I think he's got a lot of potential value just as somebody, even if he never plays the season, he's got value to some degree because of the opportunity if anything were to happen to Derick Henry. Another running back they have is Jeremy McNichols. And Jeremy McNichols is another guy who's been around the team for a little bit, but he is more of a PPR option who will probably be the backup that gets more snaps on the season than Evans. But it's because McNichols is more of a PPR kind of player. So there could be an argument made for if there's a certain game where Tennessee's fallen behind and they need to dump it off to McNichols. It could be a decent stream from time to time, but that's not really that smart of a play in my opinion because he's never going to get the amount of volume that Derick Henry is going to get. They're going to prioritize Henry, obviously, but McNichols does have some opportunity in the event they're on passing downs, trying to catch up or 2-minute drill, something like that. Brian Hill is also another running back on this team. He's had some moderate success in the past with Atlanta, but I simply don't think he's going to get the opportunity. I'm not sure if he's really even going to make the roster. Now we move to wide receivers. And the wide receiver that I want to start with first is A.J. Brown, because A.J. Brown, a lot of people know this already, but there's going to be people that are going to probably take Julio Jones over A.J. Brown. I've generally not seen that. I've seen A.J. Brown going first as he should be. But A.J. Brown, excellent guy to have. He missed 2 games last season, but he still finished as the number 13 wide receiver on the season. He does get a little bit touchdown dependent sometimes. He had 11 touchdowns last season, over 1,000 yards. But he had 106 targets, which led the team. And the other significant load of targets was going to Corey Davis, who wasn't on the team last year. So there's potentially he could get some more targets, especially since Julio Jones has had some health issues before. So A.J. Brown, a guy that I really like. I think Julio could potentially limit some of his touches, but at the same time, I think it will. I'm not super concerned about that. I think A.J. Brown, solid player on the rise. He's going to be the top target for Ryan Tannehill. Overall, I think he's a great player that you can pick up 3rd, 4th round, depending on where he goes on the board. Then we go to Julio Jones. This is my second time talking about Julio Jones, because when I started these videos with Atlanta, he was still on Atlanta. Now he's on Tennessee. Julio, he's a very talented player. He's showing a little bit of signs of decline. Last season, he wasn't necessarily great, but when he does have his games where he goes off, he usually puts up massive points. And he's obviously got the talent, and he's got an excellent offense that he's on now that could set him up for success. And I actually think now he's a little bit underrated, because I've mostly seen him going 4th, 5th round in fantasy football drafts. And if he goes off for some of the games like he did in Atlanta 2-3 years ago, I know you're looking at the past a little bit there, but he's got the capability to put up 200-yard games or multiple touchdown games or multiple 10-plus reception games. So he's going to be a little bit boom or bust at times, I predict, but he's still got a lot of value as somebody that, especially if you can get in the 5th round, if he falls that far, he's definitely somebody to consider grabbing, because this offense is going to give him opportunity. And I think it actually helps that he has somebody like A.J. Brown or Derick Henry in the backfield as teammates because they'll take some attention away from him, give him some opportunity to kind of stand out a little more than what it was like in Atlanta. Other players that they have on this receiving core, Josh Reynolds they brought over from Los Angeles. He's had some good games from time to time with the Rams and could have some opportunity here as kind of a slot player. But I'm not really a big fan of him just because of the volume that's projected. If Julio is out, though, I think Reynolds has a lot of potential to be somebody that you can pick off on waivers and give you some good value. Other players, they have Cameron Batson, the guy who's been around on their team for a little bit. He's got some potential to step up given the need for a third receiver to be consistent. So he's somebody to keep an eye on. But the one that I like the most to potentially step up and fill that third receiver void is Fitzpatrick. He is a rookie wide receiver taken in the 4th round this season out of Louisville. And he's going to have the opportunity because with Reynolds kind of not really – Reynolds has been good, but he's not really breakaway potential to really be a elite receiver on an offense. Same with Batson, but Fitzpatrick, he's got some opportunity ahead of him, and he's a younger player, so he's got more room to develop and a higher ceiling than those guys. So a guy that's probably not going to get taken until very late in drafts, but especially if anything were to happen to Brown or Jones, then Fitzpatrick could be an excellent option that you can get who's mostly going to be undrafted or taken in very deep leagues late. So that's another guy to keep an eye on. And then another receiver they took is Racey McMath, who is a 6th-round pick from LSU. And LSU has made some good receivers in the past, like Odell Beckham, Jamar Chase, guys like that, Justin Jefferson. So, you know, he's got some opportunity to maybe step up. I know that he's a late pick and he doesn't necessarily have a lot of opportunities necessarily as somebody who's projected to be the 5th receiver at best on the Titans, but he's still somebody to keep an eye on, especially if injuries occur. Now we will move to the tight end position, and this is definitely a lot less encouraging than some of the other players I've talked about, but their tight end is Anthony Firkser. They've had some tight ends before that have been projected to be good players for them, like Jonnu Smith, Delaney Walker, and now those guys are gone. So Firkser, who was the most consistent last year of these players, is the one who's left. Last season, he had 39 receptions, 387 yards, and a touchdown. And Jonnu Smith had 8 touchdowns last year. So in theory, Firkser could get some more and kind of fill some of that gap there. But overall, I think that I'm not super high on him because Tennessee more than likely is going to run multiple tight ends and get the ball around to different guys, which they've kind of, that's the way it's been in the past. Geoff Swaim is the backup. He's had some opportunity before. And then Luke Stalker, another tight end that they have there as well that could kind of step in and get some touches for them as well. It's going to be mostly a rush-based offense and then play-action pass to receivers. So that just simply doesn't provide a lot of opportunities for tight ends, in my opinion. So Firkser, if he's going to be undrafted more than likely, so he's a decent guy to pick up from time to time, especially that 2-week stretch where they play the Jets and Jags back-to-back for streaming. But overall, I'm not the biggest fan of having him as a tight end. The defense. So the defense was very bad last year. They were one of the worst defenses in football, which was surprising because they were actually very good for the few seasons before that. So they're trying to re-identify themselves and get some good players back. They drafted Caleb Farley. They brought over Bud Dupree from Pittsburgh. But for me personally, I'm playing the what is this? How does the saying go? Like in almost like guilty until proven innocent almost, or something like that, is that unless these guys show me that they can be a consistent defense and be, you know, kind of the defense that they replicated in the past, I'm generally avoiding them. And that's the beauty of when you take these defenses late, is that if Tennessee actually does very well, then you could pick them up on waivers and then have an elite defense. They're going to be an undrafted defense. Probably, I don't think they're going to be very good this season, but I also would not be surprised in a world where they are really good and surprise a lot of people. So leave them on waivers for now, but keep an eye how they do to start the season. And then their kicker is Tucker McCann. I believe he's a new kicker. I'm not really familiar with him, but he's going to have some opportunity in this offense to, you know, get some opportunities to kick some points and some extra attempts and things like that. But it's gonna, with somebody like Derick Henry, they're probably going to convert most of their goal line attempts into touchdowns. So he's probably going to get more extra point attempts and field goals. And I actually just looked him up here at the report about him, and it said he's been inconsistent early in camp and has made 7 of his 11 field goal attempts. So there's a good possibility this guy is going to get cut before the season anyway. So another guy you just leave on waivers, and then if he starts putting some good games together when the season rolls around, then you can consider picking him up. And that's why, again, why you take defensive kicker at the end. Go back to my previous videos that I talk about this a lot. But yeah, so that's all I got for Tennessee. One team left. It's the Washington football team, my personal favorite team. And then after that, we will get into some position strategies. So stay tuned. And remember, comment Chris Johnson below if you caught that. He's the answer to the trivia question. All right, I'll see you guys next time. Bye.